Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Trade Out of PPS podcast with Rudy and Jamari. As usual, I'm Rudy, and alongside me on this journey is the one and only.
Jamari Jones, everybody.
How you doing today, brother?
Good. I'm doing awesome, man. It's kind of nuts. We're
It
getting
is.
back into everything.
Back in the school while and in the pandemic still, right?
Right, yeah. Still in the pandemic. Trying to stay safe. It was good, man. It was busy, and it was just good to see the kids.
Yeah,
It was like the hardest last 2 days of the month that you
yeah,
know, well, yeah. It's been a hard 2 days.
yeah, for real. Um, yeah, I feel you. The school started. It feels like you go through PD, you spend you spend the whole time preparing, and those 2 days are always like hectic, because it's the first day back. People are trying to get acclimated. There's a lot of like unknown. People are trying to figure stuff, so you have to troubleshooting a lot. But it does get better. But for some reason, the first that's why they started 2 days before the actual school weeks, to get you that time to adjust. So
Right.
yeah. So
So
yeah,
I'm
what's back?
excited. And before we go move on, we just want to thank again all our listeners.
Thank
As we
you.
do every episode, we appreciate you guys so much. You can find us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and our podcast is on Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Google Podcasts. We are on YouTube.
Yes, we
We're
are.
everywhere,
We are everywhere.
everywhere.
Thank
So
you for the support.
yeah, so thank you guys. Keep sharing it. It helps us a lot. Keep engaging with our content. It helps us out a lot. Um, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And so, moving on, we're gonna get into our views on the latest news.
What we
Um,
got? What we got?
I know, man. There's a lot happening.
It
There's a
is.
lot happening.
It is.
So let's get into our mayoral debate.
Yeah, man. It's preliminary to start pushing up. By the time this podcast goes out, we will be 1 day away from the preliminary election for the municipal election in Boston. And yeah, we have to pick a mayor, we have to pick city councilor
Hmm.
at large. We have to, and I'm from District 4, so I have to pick because Andrea is running for mayor. So I have to pick the person from my district who's gonna represent Andrea. I had the opportunity to go to vote early in person, you
Yep.
know, you know, so yeah, definitely I definitely took advantage of that.
Hmm.
Definitely wanted to because it's time we need to get involved. Everything we do is politics.
Yep.
We need to get involved. We need to find the right person for the job and hold them accountable.
Yeah.
So yeah, the we watched the debate. It was crazy. Uh, you know, um, it's so interesting because it's a very close race.
Hmm.
Like it seems like most of them have similar agenda, but I think where the difference is some of the priority on those agenda. And
Yeah.
that makes a difference. Um, yeah,
And
it's been interesting.
yeah, it's been very interesting. I didn't get to catch it live like you. Um,
Yeah,
so I'm like halfway through it. And it was pretty decent. It was
yeah,
pretty good. One article I was reading, it was saying that each of the, you know, candidates has BPS, like has a connection to BPS. Some of
okay,
them
yeah,
were not necessarily born and raised in Boston, but
yeah,
the children,
yeah,
they're
yeah,
a BPS parent or they've been through BPS. So that is something encouraging to hear.
yeah.
But what you said is key. Where does that land on your plan as priority?
Priority.
So that's something that I've been looking out for, and yeah, it's great to have this energy of people that want to help Boston.
Yeah.
Again, like we've been talking about, we have to hold these people accountable, make sure they have the city and our best interests at heart.
Yep.
So yeah, it's great. So all our listeners, make sure you tune in, make sure you go out and vote.
Go out and vote.
Yeah.
I don't know what the numbers are exact. I know, like, if there's like 46,000, 47,000 people registered to vote in Boston,
Mhm.
only 12,000 out of those registered voters go to vote during
Wow.
this, like, especially in a non-presidential election. So we need to do better. We need to get engaged. We need to get involved, because those policies that they put in place have to do with us. So we can no longer afford to be silenced, no longer afford to just watch. Like, we need to fight, we need to make our voice heard. Um, yeah,
Twelve thousand.
so yeah,
Wow.
like, yeah, I don't know what the exact number, but it's around those things. So we need to do better. If we're registering
Yeah.
to vote, we need to vote, like, not just on election day, on a
Right.
presidential election day, you
Yeah.
know. After this, there are currently 5 candidates for mayor. Only 2 will move on for the November election. 2. So this is
Wow.
crucial. Like, even for the council at large, I think there's probably 17. Out of
Hmm.
17, only 8 will move on.
Hmm.
It is crucial. Um, like,
That you vote.
yeah, vote. Like, look at the agenda, see, like, where you fit, see where you fit, see where your community fit, and what they have to do, where the priority. So yeah, it's time. So go
Yeah.
vote.
And I second that. For the next news, the views on the latest news is schools increasing mental health supports this year. And then experts, or within that news article, experts were saying that it may not be enough. One of the excerpts that came from the article, researchers estimate nearly 104,000 children in the United States lost parents to COVID. Nearly 1 in 3 Black or Latino families nationwide face multiple compounding hardships such as housing insecurities, hunger, and unemployment, twice the rate as white and Asian American families. Um, so with this is just speaks volumes to what our school system is facing and what our community is facing. Um, I'm glad that the funding that we have, right, is going towards increasing social workers to make our schools more equitable to other schools in different districts. But I do think that we should have been had that, and this is just making it kind of equal to what we were supposed to have. But we're gonna need a lot more supports to what I think the article was trying to get at. I am happy as a guidance counselor getting social workers into our schools because it alleviates some of the things that I have to do, and that I can focus on, like, not my actual job, but like on different things to support students where like I don't have to wear too many different hats. Not saying I'm not gonna still do that, but it takes off some burden.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely hear what, because I feel like, because educators or teachers or like school staff, they get so good at being creative
Mhm.
and the things they do. So, like, we ended up wearing multiple hat by default, and but it can also, like, burn some. And when you think about it, it's like, are you is it good, like, good for the student, like, when,
Mhm.
like, educators get so burned up like that. So yeah, like, uh there's definitely need more, because remember before, uh especially for BPS, there was a lot of budget cuts,
Mhm.
like, so it's just like, one is getting to the amount of funding we had before, and then exceeded because um putting the money that was taken away back is not, that's not equity. Like, that's not equity because now we need more than we originally need.
hmm
So yeah.
No, that's perfect. And I'm hoping that we continue on this trajectory of like the the city and the governments like giving us support on this academic level. Um, and I hope they don't like you said, like
uh,
take it away after we get through this, because we will
yeah.
get through this. So I agree with you 100%. Um, so the next thing, one of the big topics everyone has been talking about is the busing issues. Um,
Yeah.
that was one topic in the mayoral debate, was the busing issues that we were going to face on the first day, which we did face on the first day.
It took like it's so crazy to me because the amount of planning we do, like,
Mhm,
and we know the problem was gonna arrive, right? And yet nothing was done. There was no communication. It was just like come on, like do you care? Do we care? Because by extension, by being part of the system, we like accomplice of the system because we like, and parents are looking at it, oh, do you like how important those buses are,
mhm,
like, and yeah, I just felt like it was poorly managed. Not, and that goes back to priority.
mhm.
What is the priority? Like,
Right.
like whatever your agenda is in the selection, like our education system should be like priority, part
Mhm.
of your priority. There's no putting in the back, like, no, we need this right now. Priority. Like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that if we get praised on, being one of the best areas for, schooling, and our public schools are, not that bad is what they say.
Yeah.
Um, but we still have to be at the front of this, of this of the whoever is going to become mayor's plan, because our future is within these young people,
Yeah.
these Bostonians that are coming up, and we have to, I know we talked about this last season, we have to invest in our community, invest in our young people, invest in our schools, because one day me and you are going to be too old, to be to be doing this, and like we want to make sure like our next generation is coming up and have the resources necessary to make this community flourish. So
Yeah.
yeah, parents weren't happy, and hopefully we do better next week. But currently, and this is like a plug, there are a lot of openings. I read in the article there are 60 positions opening for bus drivers. So anybody looking for work,
Yeah.
um, and you need a
You need
job,
it. Yeah.
yeah, I would love if you would apply.
Yeah.
And then we have 100 bus monitor positions open within BPS. So
Yeah.
definitely apply, share with your friends. We need you. We need you. Um, so with that being said, that concludes our views from the latest news.
Awesome. All right. On this episode 14 of season 2 with the Straight Out of BS podcast with Free and Jamari, we'll be joined today by two guests. Two guests. We have a teacher and a counselor. Jennifer Salazar, who's a teacher, and Maria Alejandra Mosquera, who is the social worker. We can't wait to dive in and have that conversation with them. So yeah, let's go.
Let's get it.
Yeah. Hey everyone, we are back. Joining us today on this episode is Jennifer Salazar and Maria Alejandra Mosquera. Um, Thank you for joining us today. We are now starting this new school year still under a pandemic while also facing other mutated form. For this episode, it was important for us to discuss strategy and challenges, and from your perspective as we navigate through this new school year. And Hispanic Heritage Month is around the corner. And as we focus on our theme for this season, which is advocacy, so we wanted to understand from your perspective, how can we celebrate Hispanic heritage culture outside of the 30 days? And how can we advocate for Latinx as non-Latinx? So let's get started. So we can start with Jennifer. How did you end up in your field, and what was this always the plan, and why BPS?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. So I have been teaching in BPS for 11 years now, and I have always wanted to be a teacher. Low key, and this is not an exaggeration, the earliest memory I have of education and wanting to be an educator was when I was like 4 years old and in pre-K. And I have a nephew who's about a year younger than me, and he was too young to go to pre-K. So I would come home from pre-K and like copy the things my teacher made us do, and I'd make him do it. And then my sister-in-law would give me like $1 per lesson. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I like this. So teaching has always been the thing that makes me happy. In particular, I found myself called towards the social studies, the humanities, so history, literature, sociology were always things that made me really critical in a good way and always kept me engaged and entertained and also angry, truthfully. And so that anger sometimes and that frustration at what I was learning and what I was not learning was essentially kind of the catalyst that made me want to become a history teacher or social studies teacher. And so that's why I'm here. I ended up in BPS by accident, truthfully, a good accident. I am originally from New York City, came to Massachusetts via Posse's scholarship to undergrad at Wheaton College. And then I always knew I wanted to go into teaching, so went right to Tufts for my master's degree. And then doors just started opening because Boston is such a really small city, but people knew people and connected me. And next thing I knew, I was a teacher in BPS and I loved it. I've always been attracted to small schools, to schools that were part of the Coalition of Essential Schools. And so that's essentially how I found my way here. And I'm happy. I have not left 11 years in. I left one time and then I learned my lesson and never again.
We don't want you to leave, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, please don't. As earlier was mentioned, my name is Maria Alejandra Mosquera, but I go by Alejandra or Maria, or both. So I ended up in social work. From a very young age, I was always like very righteous, right? I think I was always ready to fight the bully. Like that was always me. And so it was about when I was in high school, I did this program called the Student Job Success Program that was affiliated with Brigham and Women's. And what they did is they took kids from BPS schools that were focused on health or focused on science and allowed them to work in clinics or health centers. So I was assigned to Southern Jamaica Plain, where there was a lot of like equity work being done and a lot of conversations about race. And then from there, I went into kind of servicing people. I became a community resource specialist. I came back and became a family planner after school. I think Jumari can kind of talk about this a little bit because we were in the same posse and we went to center together. But I've always wanted to be a social worker at some point. And I've always been very courageous and like speaking up in different spaces and I never shied away from an uncomfortable situation. I think that's something that I've habitually practiced. And it was at some point where I realized that I really love making people feel better and that feeling of transitioning them into being in better spaces. So once I got I graduated from BC about 3 years ago. The program of social work. And I was like passionate about community violence, right? Because that was something that impacted my family directly, and also was something that we saw in BPS all the time. Like our friends were getting shot, our friends were like, we were losing people, and nobody really like had a conversation with us about it, right? Nobody really like kind of supported us and normalized that this isn't normal. You're not supposed to expect this. And so I went into community violence and did a lot of work with homicide, bereavement, and other forms of survivors of violence. And I was just like, I was getting 28-year-olds and 27-year-olds, and something in me said, I don't want them to get here. I don't want to be with them when they're already here, right? I don't want to sit in this space with them, not because I don't want to support them, but simply I feel like I could do more in preventing them from getting here, and being more of a support and recognizing that they're not, the deficiency is not in them. So I'm also BPS alumni, so I came back. So it's my second year right now. It's completely different than what I'm used to. I'm used to the hospital type of vibe. So it's been definitely a learning curve, and yet like having those kids in that building is just a whole different vibe, right? I think it's definitely where I'm meant to be. So I hopefully I can continue doing the work.
Thank you. It's also interesting to hear because I ended up in education by default because of everything I went through. It's so refreshing to hear that for you, Jen, like, since 4 years, that's what you wanted to do. And Alejandra, like you got into this because everything like you or family been through, like you wanted that change. You always that revolutionary mind, which is so dope because when we think about how do we get more brown and black folks in education, like those story matters because we need to talk about them so we can get more people into those fields. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's definitely encouraging. And I definitely, for me, it was more so an accident more than anything. I got into BPS through college advising corps, which I met Rudy, and it turned out to evolve into an actual job that I can do. So it was dope. It was dope. So moving on to the next question, how do you feel about the return to school this year? How does that differ from last year? And Maria, we can start with you.
For me, like, so I started working in the schools with COVID. So I didn't, my first year was with COVID. So I'm like, I'm overwhelmed these last 2 days because I'm like, oh, this is how school actually is supposed to be, right? So I think the return of the school is one thing's for sure, right? I think developmentally and human behavior doesn't really change when it's impacted, right? In terms of we know what's to come. And some of the kids are figuring out how to socialize for the first time and figuring out how to make friends for the first time. Even the adults are weird, right? Like this is all you get from people, right? You get the eyes. You can't read smiles. Like smiling with your eyes, like
Mm-hmm.
I could be putting a sour mouth when I do this, right? And so I think it's hard to like I'm keying in more on body language and how people interact is huge now because you can't necessarily, especially with little ones that don't know how to verbalize what they need, is like you can't really figure it out and see somebody in their face that they're mad or that they're happy. So it's definitely different in terms of how we socialize, how we interact. And last year, I struggled in terms of recognizing that our schools were essentials. Like the minute we removed the ability to come into our schools, we took so much from our families, right? And
Yeah.
I'm not talking about just the single parents that needed a place for their kids to be at because they had to work, but simply like a mom would have their kid logged on at 9 and by 11:10 that kid wasn't returning, right? And they had no idea. So this level of communication, this level of support, simply realizing like I got an eviction letter, I just need somebody in this space to read it for me. So all these different things, it's definitely piled up. And this year, focusing more on our emotions and what we give and how we read people, how we interact, and rebuilding social skills, even as adults, and allowing ourselves to be more regulated is definitely going to be one of the bigger challenges I'm seeing already. And it's going to be different for me in terms of that. Because I started when COVID was there versus now that COVID is still here and yet we still have to come into the building. Seeing those interactions is definitely interesting, and being creative how to support it is going to be a challenge.
Right. I think one thing that I love that you said, and we talked about this in a few, I think last season, is how essential our schools are and how it's the hub, but sometimes it's not funded the way it's supposed to be funded. And but they want BPS, the community wants so much of from us, but we don't actually have the resources. And how when COVID hit, resources just started coming out of nowhere, right? But before, when we were asking for it, it was like, we don't have enough money, we don't have this, we don't have that. But when our back was against the wall, we can do it when we want to do it. Not we, but the other we. But sorry, Jen, same question.
I was just laughing at your comment because I was like, yep, 100%. I remember when I first started teaching, it was like Game of Thrones to try to get a computer cart and computer access to kids. And it was like fighting to get to like sign out the computer card. And yeah, and then all of a sudden, and the pandemic has been horrible for lots of things, but one of the silver linings is like, oh, so we could be one-to-one. We could be a one-to-one district with technology. We could compete with schools like, in Hingham, where kids were getting iPads, years before the pandemic. And I was like, oh, so we did have that fund, right?
Yeah.
Why was that such an issue for so many years? Why did it have to take this pandemic for our kids to be able to get access to technology? Like it's bananas. But anywho, I digressed. You just triggered me there. I was like feeling all the feels. I think I feel the same way I did about school opening last year, which was just like tremendous anxiety, to be transparent. Anxiety, not just for myself as a person and trying to keep myself and my family safe, but also myself as an educator, worrying about my kids and their families. I had students lose parents and family members to COVID. So it was something, and it is still something that is very, I think, traumatic and hard for a lot of our kids. I think that although the anxiety is the same, what is triggering the anxiety is a little bit different this year than last year. So last year, a lot of reopening was the unknown questions, right? Like, what is virtual school going to be like? What are the expectations? How are we going to support kids and families through virtual learning? I'm in high school, so it's a little bit different versus like elementary school teachers who had to teach families and kids, like, this is how you turn on Zoom, right? And this is how you use a computer. And all these new technology skills that little ones had to learn were different. This year, I think my anxiety is about how do we keep our community safe in the midst of a pandemic, right? We have young people who do have underlying conditions who are in the building now, and how do we keep them safe? Wearing a mask is not the most comfortable thing. Anyone who does it for 8, 10, 12 hours a day will tell you that. And kids are kids, right? Even if they're young adults, 14, 15, 16 years old, they still want to breathe and take off the mask. And so trying to navigate those human basic needs with also these kind of mitigation safety needs that need to be kept in place is a little bit stressful. And I'm, I think, although I'm anxious, I am thrilled to have seen children in the building. The energy that you get when you are in a building with young people is unparalleled. Like, that will never be replicated in a virtual world ever. Like, you cannot. And kids were excited, and teachers were excited, and it was just beautiful to be together again. But it was also very grounding. I asked my 9th graders, because we talk about it. We talk about the schools having closed. What was it, in 2020? Right? I don't even know. My sense of time has been warped. But
2020.
I asked my 9th graders. I said, when was the last time you guys were in a school building? And they were like, oh, when I was in 7th grade. And these are 9th graders, and it was like, but when they say it like that, you're just like, holy smokes! Like, you guys have not really been in school for a hot minute, right? So it's going to be a whole new world, I think. And so just lots of feelings, but also some excitement. And also, this is the year of just kind of figuring it out as we go.
Mm-hmm.
I like how you put it so well, put it, navigate to the human needs versus the like mitigation needs, because it's not like we all feel like masks are uncomfortable, but if it's needed, are you willing to sacrifice that uncomfortable to be uncomfortable just to like make your community and be secure in your community? So it was so well put out. Thank you for saying that.
Mm-hmm. For our next question, last year was one of the most challenging years ever for students and staff. From the social worker slash teacher lens, what was the most challenging part about supporting students last year? Which I think both of you kind of touched on. And what do you think the most challenging part about supporting students in BPS this year is going to be, which you guys kind of touched upon? But do you have any other thoughts on that? And we can start with Maria. No, Jen, because we started with Maria last time.
Super equitable. Look at you, Jamari.
I'm trying.
Here for it. Here for it. I think it really goes last year, thinking about last year a lot, it goes back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, not to be one of those ed people, but we're gonna throw that out there.
Yeah.
It really, when the school buildings close, I think as a society in the United States, we were like, we realized the significance of these buildings, right? Not just as institutions of learning, but places for family support, for emotional support, for, for some kiddos, that's where they got food, right? And food insecurity is real in all places in this country and in BPS. So when the buildings closed down last year, a lot of the focus and a lot of the challenge was like, how do we get basic needs met? Are our kids safe? Are our families safe? What do they need? And from my school, I work at a great school in BPS. I am super obsessed and grateful to be there. And I have a huge crush on my colleagues, which is part of why I work there. They're incredible. Like they hit the ground running and went beyond, like above and beyond what we think schools and school staff do, right? So there were, donations pouring in to support families who were financially insecure at that point. There were, flowers sent to families who had lost someone due to COVID. There were just ways in which we tried to keep our community together. That was not just about instruction and curriculum. I think this year, a big challenge is going to be continuing to make sure that those needs are met, right? And that's going to be slightly easier now that the buildings are open. But for all that students learned last year in terms of new skills with technology and whatnot, there are going to be some things that are a little different, right? And so kind of relearning what it means to be in a school building and not be able to be on your phone all the time or things like that. And, just like the little typical young adult teenage behaviors. But I think it'll be a little bit easier now that the buildings are open. That's my hope, at least.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Jennifer has stated in terms of a lot of his basic needs being met, right? So people can just function, even just to log on, even just to be academically present. I will say that thinking what we went through during the COVID, I realized what Jennifer said, right? The buildings are so essential, and like child safety was a huge, right? Attendance was huge. And when we say attendance, it's like, how can I verify this child safe? Like they're not, I did so many house visits just to make sure the kid was good, right? And so a lot of that was coming from being able to not communicate with families and realize at that moment, you realize how poor relationship we've built with our community. That was kind of like, oh yeah, we don't really do this well, do we? And recognizing that, not just talking about our families in general, but also our folks that don't speak English, right? Even just like the Zoom walking it through was so intimidating for them. Even like filling out a form, even not being able to help the child with the homework, right? A lot of our families are not necessarily, they're not literate in their own language, and so that's a challenge, right? And it's not that they're not smart, they're intimidated just by anything that they can't really navigate. So being able to support families in that way was definitely challenging. And mental health, I mean, I know I work with a lot of middle schoolers, so like, you know, I had to call the best team a few times. You know, I had to like have a very difficult conversation mostly with a lot of my Latinx families, where we like, I think your child's suicidal, right? And navigating that in a way that they understand it, in the sense of urgency, right? And culturally doing it in a way that's supportive in the way they're going to respond to that. That was definitely a big challenge. And I also feel like the bullying, it switched, right? Because kids are creative, right? So the bullying switches, right? So they're able to navigate it in a way where Zoom bombing was a thing. They're able to navigate it where, like, you know, and how do you really like create consequences for that? Right? How do you create consequences where, like, oh, you know, we try to do stuff where like community harm was done. This is how we're gonna re-enter the space. Right. But even then, that's difficult, right? And so it's like we also want our kids to learn as they're getting bored and learning harmful behaviors. We want them to unlearn those harmful behaviors. I think coming back is definitely, I agree with Jennifer, it's the social cues, is the conversation, is gonna be the connect. And I do want to name, just because I have to put it out there, that like challenging last year, I mean, we can't forget George Floyd's death, right? And I think that the conversation of anti-racism definitely started to be a thing. I don't know how performative it was. I do feel like now we have to really have a real conversation how deficient we see our kids, and that's our problem. That's the system's problem. Our kids come with so much resiliency and so much strength already. We just got to give them the skill set. Unfortunately, a lot of adults, though, I feel like that was a challenge. Definitely a lot of adults struggle with understanding that and perpetuate, well, the kid has the issue. Well, he's not logging on with, you know, they're not doing attendance. Well, I don't know where they're at. What do you want me to do? I want you to build a relationship with the family. That's what I want to do. Right? I don't know how to say it any better. I need you to build a relationship with this family. Oh, but I don't know what's going on with mom. I need you to try a little harder. And I know it's not to like, I know teachers are definitely working super hard and we're super burnt out. And you know what's also exhausting? Racism. So we get it. We can't necessarily be like, oh, you know, I'm gonna stop being Latina today. Let me take off my skin and my hair. Let me just chill. That's not an option for us. So I need you to work a little bit, even if it's 1%. I need you to realize how that's impacting our kids and having difficult conversations. Because not only is like George Floyd's happened, the BLM protests, and then we have like you know, the Capitol being, I don't know what the heck I don't even know what to call it half the time.
It was terrorism.
It was terrorism, right?
That's what it was.
Yeah. So and like it was a coup. I don't even know what it was. Like I look at it, I'm like, what? Those conversations have to be held with our kids. You know, that's impacting them. And so, how do you navigate those spaces where you're validating all identities, and how you navigate those spaces also where you're not oppressing the historically oppressed folks? So I think those were the both ends, right? It was just definitely being able to support our kids and also challenging our staff not to be comfortable. Now you have to sit in your discomfort. Now I need you to grow. Now I need you to get out of this. And I think people respond, you know, claim it's unsafe to be in those spaces. And it's just, you're just uncomfortable. And I'm realizing now how much, going back to like that first question, why BPS? Like I realized like we were seen as deficient. Like, I lacked qualities. Like I was told in high school that, you know, don't become another Latina statistic, right? Don't, you know what is that to be told that? Or like they tell you, you know, we can't take you anywhere because you guys are loud, you know, or you all are loud. Like those type of things are like, wait a minute, what's wrong with us being us? What's wrong with us being like this? Yes, we can navigate it. There's time and place. Then teach me that. Don't necessarily tell me I lack. Like something's wrong with where I come from.
Yeah.
And I realized that that's the approach we definitely gave a lot of space to when we weren't able to engage with kids and have them physically there. It was realizing that we don't lack the skill to really navigate our families the way they deserve.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're too stuck on like, they're the problem. We're like, it's like this mentality, like, it's like we're a blessing in these kids' lives sometimes, right? The savior complex, and it's not necessarily, it's not okay, right? It's not okay at all.
No, that's definitely all good points. And one thing that, you know, I realized last year is that we put a lot of band-aids on a lot of things for many years, and like the pandemic kind of exposed us or the BPS system or the school system in general, and it's like this doesn't really work at all. And like we have to reshape it and redo this education thing, especially for Latinx students, Black and Brown students, like, and it kind of exposed us for that.
But that's big. So, um, COVID, like, is very equitable. It doesn't care who you are, where you're from. It's like for
Right.
everybody. So, like, for a long time, we never had that one thing in common. I don't know if you had heard, like, I've heard, like, remember so many times, like, if an alien if the alien comes and start attacking us, then we'll have something in common to fight. So if you think about it, COVID is kind of the alien that came and is affecting people. And now, like, as you're trying to navigate it, like, oh, you guys don't have the same resources that we have to navigate it, so it's kind of exposed those things. But I'm glad you guys touching on so many stuff. Like for Jen, one question I think you, like when you're talking about your seventh grader who, like, when the last time they're in the building now, the ninth grader, and talking about like being in the building and like instruction and curriculum, is there a need? Do you feel like a need as you go into your curriculum that the students are like what they learned, they didn't learn enough during the pandemic, and how do you take that as for this upcoming year to teach them? Like, do you have to go back to what they were supposed to know last year, or just keep moving?
That's a really great question. I think I don't know. I'm not going to say. I was like, I think I can speak for all teachers. I'm not going to speak for all teachers, but there is that term learning loss is really popular now, and it's thrown around left and right. And I think it also goes to what Alejandra was saying about like this kind of deficit mindset that people have about kids and about students, and especially students in public schools and students from larger cities. Um, yeah, there were some things that students didn't learn last year, right? Like, let's be real. There's only so much you can get through via virtual remote school. But there were a lot of other things that kids learned, right? And a lot of other skills that they built, like students who had, I'm very fortunate in that I work in a school where I get to loop with my kids for a few years. So I get to see them when they're babies in ninth grade, and then I, see them off, at the end of their junior year. And kids who, had historically in my class struggled with time management, like remote school was awesome for them. They figured out a great system for themselves to like be able to
Yeah.
manage their time. When do I have to get this done? And then their ability to communicate like was fantastic. Like, and again, this is my experience, right? Not every teacher had that experience. And obviously developmentally, high school students versus middle school students versus elementary school, all very different. But I think if you ask teachers, like, yes, there were things that kids struggled with last year for sure, and that maybe they perhaps didn't learn. There were also other things that they did learn and other skills that they did gain. And so I think, balancing it that way is really important. All that to say that, like, this week was the first week of school with students. Starting to get to know names and eyeballs because you can't really see faces right now.
Mhm.
And it's really, at least from my perspective, my goal in the next few weeks is kind of trying to figure out, okay, where are my kids at? Because I think as an educator, your job is not to teach them where you think they should be, but to meet them where they're at. And every student is going to be so different. And every student is coming from different middle schools, right? And different teachers and different, settings. And also homes are different, right? So some students had great home setups where they could focus on virtual school and they could do the things, but other students didn't. And so, as a high school teacher, I had students who were the primary caretakers for younger siblings who were also doing virtual school.
Right.
So oftentimes I'd have kids like, Miss, I'll be right back. My sister has class right now. And yeah, okay, go do that. Go help your sister, right? And so everyone's access to learning last year was a little bit different. And so as a teacher, I think our job is to see where our kids are at right now and then modify the curriculum from that point forward. And what every kid needs is going to be different, right?
Mhm.
So I had all these great, incredible plans, but that's just what they are, plans.
Yeah,
You always go back and rework those plans for your kids.
Right.
that comes with intentionality. And going back to what Alenda was saying about, like, you cannot stop being Latina for one day, or like them perceiving, oh, you too loud. And I think like, if we look at the system, the blueprint is white supremacy. And we have to mold ourselves to be something. That's why our culture left at the door. That's why we cannot be ourselves. That's why if you look at like a student can act up in a classroom, when you send them to the dean's office where they with the people, they are calm and they're fine. So it's like, because like, and that's why we need to remold the system, like, and have culture be part of our instruction and curriculum 24/7.
Throughout this entire time, one of the voices we haven't heard or haven't had the chance to hear from are the actual educators. Or maybe we heard from the educators, but their voices didn't seem to be given a lot of value. How do you think teachers and staff can be best supported moving forward as we enter back into this new year? And we can start with Ale.
I think, I mean, and I think we're gonna have to be creative, right? Because I think teachers and staff are gonna find new hurdles as they come. And I think because it's very unknowing what we're about to find, right? It's kind of like, you know, re-entering some weird realm that you once lived in and don't know what it looks like anymore. So I think one of the things I do feel is like definitely emotionally supporting teachers, right? And I think that might sound like, but SEL for teachers is just as important as it is for kids. And recognizing that I need my adults to be regulated, and that might be like a real conversation. And I'll say that maybe what challenges staff, specifically even teachers, is like Rudy said, it's BPS is built on white supremacy. That's the blueprint, right? And one of the things that white supremacy sustain is we live in a very indirect culture where we make a lot of assumptions, where we don't talk very clearly because we want to talk so politically. And sometimes having a real conversation with somebody, hey yo, sit down, let's hash this out right now, in a very well manner where you're like trying to go through your feelings and thoughts and processing, so then adults can better be in spaces for kids. And I think that's where we need to definitely support teachers and validating that if they're not having they're having a professional disagreement, if they're struggling with a child, if they're struggling with a family, right? And I think it's natural for teachers to be defensive when certain things come up. We all are, and staff too. And how do we challenge ourselves so we could get through those hurdles? And that really is, and this is where I struggle with white supremacy, right? The individualism of everything. And the collectivism is actually what's going to get us out of this, right? And so, but we choose not to be collective a lot of the times. And I say we, because we're all part of the system. Like when we like, well, I'm just going to fend for me, right? And so when we get into that mentality, it takes a village, right? To really mold the mind of these children. So when we make those choices, or we're not unlearning that, we harm ourselves. And I think that isolation is definitely can cause that dysregulation for a lot of the staff and teachers. So being able to have transparent conversations is one thing, but most importantly, being able to give teachers what they need in real time. I think that's kind of been a challenge, because it's like you all said, right? We have the resources, we don't have the resource. Oh, that was a thing. We could have told that to the district. So I realized supporting teachers in real time and what they need, not just supplies, but realizing like, I need to get this class and this is the community norms I want to build, and how can I be part of that? And also like, I sometimes want to tell a teacher, like, most of our kids are dysregulated by adults in their lives, including us, right? We dysregulate our kids. I don't believe kids come in dysregulated because, yeah, they could be upset at each other, but they turn it around. But we can dysregulate our kids more when we don't necessarily ask what happened in a timely manner, when we necessarily don't engage in that. So I feel I'm always like, you should do a self-check before you engage in that. If not, that's what you call in for support. That's the collectivism. I don't think I can handle this right now. I need you to come in and support this kiddo. Cool, I got you, right? So I think that those are real things that staff and teachers need in terms of support.
I think Alejandra definitely nailed a lot of it. When I was looking at that question originally, the first thing that came into my mind was like mental health support for teachers and educators and school staff, truthfully. I think it was Illinois is building into their like school platform that all students will get 5 mental health days. And I think that is incredible and wonderful. And I think all districts should follow suit. But I would even push further and say, in addition to sick days, teachers and school staff should also be getting at least 5 mental health days.
Yes.
I know that, like, in terms of, as a society, at least my perception of society, I often feel like they see education, public school education in particular, and public school staff. And when I mean staff, I mean everybody that's in a school building. So teachers, paraprofessionals, special education providers, social workers, family outreach coordinators, school nurse, like all of these folks that make schools function. I feel like society often sees us as like martyrs, right? Like we should be giving 150%, 150% of the time. And because a lot of educators are called to this profession because we love our communities and we want to help our communities and give back to our communities, we often push ourselves to those limits. And that is just not sustainable. Truthfully, it's not sustainable. And when we don't push ourselves to those limits, then oftentimes, and I'll speak from my perspective, oftentimes I'll be like, oh, well, then I'm not good enough, right? Or I'm not a great teacher because I'm not, staying up till 11:30 at night planning for tomorrow or whatever the case is. And so I, for instance, always once a term, I take a day and it's my mental health day. I call in sick and it's a mental health day. I might not be physically ill, but like I take a day, usually a Friday or a Monday, and I just kind of do stuff that is not work related, that is not house related, that is not chore related, that just make me happy. Because those are those little things that kind of keep you recharged and able to keep giving back to your children, to your kids. And as like cheesy and cliche as it is, there's like that saying that like you can't give from an empty well. And I think in education that's a huge issue. And I think there's a lot of mental health and emotional support that teachers and staff need that we maybe don't always talk about, because I think in some communities, at least when I was raised in my community, and being Latina, like mental health was still very, and in some families is still very taboo, right? Like I grew up being told that depression was a choice. And it wasn't until I got older and I learned, and I was like, oh, wait, there's actually stuff that happens in your body when you're depressed. This is actually a physical thing. It's not a choice, There's just so much misconception surrounding mental health and emotional health that some people who are in need don't actually speak out about it, right? And so I think when it comes to supporting teachers and educational staff, we definitely need to invest more in that piece, because this is the type of work that you just don't clock out at 5 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
Like these are very personal relationships that you build with families and kids. And there are times where I'll be lying in bed and like, oh shoot, is so-and-so okay? I wonder how their parent is. Did they get out of the hot, So you can't always disconnect from this type of work.
Right.
Yeah, and I just kind of want to validate a little bit more that Jennifer was like, yeah, right. Like our body keeps score. Our body remembers what it goes through. And like the brain is so amazing in sending messages. We just really have to want to listen to it or learn to listen to it. Or like for me it's want, personally, I speak for myself. I sometimes be like, I know I'm tired, but I'm gonna go out, right? When I probably need to be resting, right? Maybe socializing is not what I need. I need to sleep, right? And you can, I think when we think of trauma, the best way to navigate trauma sometimes is always to rest, even if it's one day, even if it's just like unplugging yourself for one day. So I completely agree. And our bodies will respond. There's a saying in Spanish that goes, la depresión duele. Depression hurts. Right? It means, and what that means is like, people physically feel like it hurts, and it does. And, that level of validation, and realizing how we're being not just preventative, but reducing harm. Because at the end of the day, life happens. We can't control. We didn't expect this pandemic. Life will happen and we will lose loved ones and all this stuff. And yet.
Yeah, one thing I also like about what you said, Jen, is like you schedule this time to take it off, but also you don't just take off work and just do stuff at home. You take a time off from everything. like completely disconnect. And it's like I've seen some people like, I'm gonna take some time off just so I could like, work on my personal thing, and you ended up at home doing like, but it's and it feels like you didn't do anything because you didn't completely disconnect. So I think when you talk about mental health and taking some time off, it needs to be complete disconnect from everything. Yeah, very important. Um, so as we were talking, you guys, one thing we guys keep talking about, we keep talking about creative, and I think of being creative for teacher is a blessing in disguise, because as you are being creative, you like, oh, like they feel like you guys can do anything, you can make anything happen because of your creativity. Um, so with creative in mind and finding some new ways to support your student, how will you measure your success and your practice in this pandemic year? I think with Jennifer, yeah.
This is one of those questions that is really hard to answer. I don't think there is, at least for me, there is not one kind of one size fits all like answer about success during a pandemic year. I think, like I said earlier, even without a pandemic, every student's needs are so different, and every student's skills are so different that what one student might accomplish is completely different than another student's. And, an outsider might be like, well, that student did better. And that's not the case, right? Like it's your own kind of personal journey, your own personal growth, your own personal educational pursuit. But I think for me, it's always like, did I keep my kids safe? Did I keep my kids engaged and interested in not everything, but at least a few things, right? And can they advocate for themselves? Like those are essentially the things. I don't care if they can memorize who the 27th president of the United States was. I don't really care about that, right? Or if they can memorize dates, or that's not really learning, that's memorization, right? But where are they at with their life skills right now during a pandemic? Right? Were they able to advocate for their needs? Were they able to express what they wanted and needed? Were they able to go back and revise work that maybe they struggled with? Were they able to challenge themselves? So those are essentially the things I've been looking at a little bit more closely for my students.
And so thank you for doing that. Yeah, I agree. I think from my perspective as a social worker, is harm reduction. If you came in a little bit better than yesterday, I'm happy. And like one of my key things that I'm realizing now is I want just kids to practice how to regulate themselves in a structured way. Meaning, I actually had an incident yesterday where one of our kids, he has ADHD. He's very like active, and we have to constantly redirect him in most spaces. And he has that too. And I was redirecting him, and he kind of raised his voice at me, and I just stared at him. He said, "I'm sorry, miss." Right. And that was like a moment of like, ooh, this is cool. We're getting somewhere, right? Maybe it's my relationship with him, and maybe he is respect. And I think it's also him being able to be like, wait, that was not necessary, right? And him being able to check himself, like I didn't need to do all that. Right. And so that to me is a success. That to me is like that moment you managed to figure it out, and I didn't have to even raise my voice, or I didn't have to say anything else to you. And you managed to be like, I didn't need to do all that. Let me go sit down. Cool. I mean, and I think harm reduction is something our kids are exposed to so much. So I think it's harm reduction and better decision making for me in terms of how to if I could have kids realize how to make better decisions, how to manage conflict better. That's one goal I have. And I think also I'm not stopping anti-racist work. So I want to always bring this up. I want people to realize that it's always in the forefront. I want people to realize it's always in the forefront in our behaviors, in the way we interact with our kids, in the way we talk to one another, and the way we don't support one another, right? I don't think, and it should never be performative. And once we figure out like and I'll keep going back, but this deficiency ideology that we have toward our kids, it's racist within itself. And if we continue to push ourselves to unlearn that, you'll have a kid going like, yo, oh my bad, right? So those are like those are the things that like that we realize that like they come equipped, right? It's how do we build on those skills, and how do we polish them so they become really great human beings in the world, right? and sometimes to them is just leaving their neighborhoods, whatever aspirations they have. We want them to be more. And like, I'm happy you showed up today, right? Like, I'm happy. Maybe you don't want to be a doctor, but you made it through those doors. And that to me is it's successful, right? And if I had to call you 6 times to make it, but you made it the 7th time, I'm still gonna give you a little bit of speech for the 6th time, but I'm gonna still celebrate the 7th time you came in. I'm still gonna celebrate it because I'm still happy you're here. So I don't know if that's, when I think measurables, right? I think that quantitative piece instead of that qualitative piece, which is also white supremacy characteristics. So I think just living in those spaces where things are quality is how I'm gonna measure, I don't know, success, but at least some sort of progress.
Yeah. One of the things that our guidance department has been saying a lot since we started meeting and started the school year is, one, keeping our students accountable, and also like meeting them where they're at. So um, sometimes when I say meeting kids and students and families where they're at, it doesn't mean like letting them just do anything that they want, but that's still holding an accountability piece for them. And just, if they're like at below level, like, let's go down there and let's lift them up, you know? So that's something that we're focusing on this year, because we know that it's going to be a tough year. It's going to be a lot of give and take, and a learning experience for everyone. So thank you guys for that.
Yeah.
We are going to go into our break and come back with some more questions. Thank you guys for continuing to listen to the podcast, to episode 14. We are going to be dropping a part 2 to this episode on September 27th at 8 a.m. Stay tuned and tune in for part 2. Straight out of BPS, y'all.
Podcast.